So last time I was working on this bike on camera, I was printing masking plugs for sandblasting, and then you saw the final piece masked and ready for powder coat. Well, the wait was really long on that because I get it done for free at work. I just have to wait for things to get slow enough. Well, I stayed and helped the powder coat guy get those done, and unfortunately it didn't go well. They outgassed really bad. I'll throw a picture up here of that. So I had two options at that point. A, I could spend a lot of time sanding them, remasking them, and reshooting them, and there's no guarantee that they wouldn't outgas again or get worse. And that had a lot of time involved, obviously. The second option was to strip them, sand them, and polish them, which is what I should have done in the first place. So I did that on the right side, and it took me a considerable amount of time. So instead of doing the left side, I went to the local scrapyard and picked one up. This one doesn't even need rebuilt. I went ahead and sanded and polished it, and it turned out great. The right side turned out great as well. So with all the polishing out of the way, I've got one fork that I need to rebuild, and I've got everything on hand to do that, including some 3D printed fixturing and a 3D printed seal driver that I'm going to use to make this a breeze. And here's a look at that. So I made these two blocks that sandwich that in the vise. It doesn't pinch at all. What it's doing is clamping on the ridge where the dust boot rests. So there's no excess pressure on the seal bore. And then I've got a 3D printed seal driver with a nice pilot on it. It's a good tight fit, but loose enough to keep from damaging anything. On these forks, because there's no bushings on the inner fork tube, you can push the bushings in before assembling the rest of it, which is what the climber manual actually tells you to do. So for the sake of simplicity, I made this seal driver. I did skim it on the lathe at work just so I had some nice smooth surfaces, but that was mostly because the filament I was using was really old. It had a lot of little bumps on it. Moisture. Now this has all been cleaned out again and it's ready to go. I've got the seal waiting in the freezer to make this install a little bit easier. Let's get started. Here's what's left of the outgassing on the left one. The right side was way worse than that. And I've got a bunch of the red grease that came with the brake crafters kits. Use a little bit of that. All right. Make sure we're facing the right way here. Oh, broke that part of the seal driver already. Take that off so I don't want it falling inside. Well, that's in. Seal driver barely survived. And I was afraid I went overboard with the walls and everything when I was printing that. Apparently not. You know, next time I think I'll just grab a piece of round stock and whittle one out on the lathe real quick. Because that worked, but not as well as I was expecting, to be honest. Now a new clip goes in right on top. The factory service manual specifies a tool that slips on over the inner tube, which means that you would assemble that first, slide your seal over the top, slide your tool down, and use that to hammer it in. They even make universal ones or ones fitted to a specific set of sizes. That's the factory service manual route, and then there's the budget-friendly climber route, which says you use a seal driver or an appropriately sized socket just to fit inside there. And that's what I did when I rebuilt the front forks on the XL. I did that while I was living in an apartment in the kitchen of the apartment. Do whatever you're most comfortable with. As long as the end result is the same, the seal is in there, it was driven in straight and to the depth it needs to go to, I think you're fine. Now for fork oil, I went with Bell Ray 10 weight fork oil because that's what I could get my hands on. I got a little cap full of it here. Just gonna put a light coat on the rings here. Drop that into our inner. I'm going to use the spring to push it down. To help it pass the other end there. There we go. Now, can't forget this oil lock piece. It goes at the end of the damper rod. I think I'm going to go ahead and get out of this fixture for now. I'm going to try putting a spring in. Just to keep that up. Oh, I need to have my bolt ready. All right, so I've got the spring in there. Tip it upside down. Just rest that on my foot. Oh. Got to lube up the seal. Put some Loctite 242 on the bolt here. That's what the manual calls for. Drop that in. The torque spec is 11 to 18 foot-pounds, so I went all the way to 18 foot-pounds. There we go. I had the top cap and spring installed, just to make sure that that was held firmly. All right, I've got it secured back in the fixture now. I'm gonna measure out a half cup. That's 125. It calls for 160. So this is gonna get me close. I just realized I forgot to put the seal screw in. Dang. Knew I was missing something. Okay, now that the plug screw is in, as I was saying, it gives you the measurement in milliliters, fluid ounces, and it also gives you the distance from the top of the tube to the top of the fluid without the spring in millimeters and inches. Well, I went with millimeters, and since I don't have a ruler long enough, I made a mark on this piece here so that I can dip it in and see when I'm touching oil. So I'm going to add little bits at a time until it just touches the bottom of my measured stick. Nothing yet. I'm going to call it right there. Now, both the climber manual and the factory service manual specify that the titer coils should be facing down. I know there's a lot of different mixed opinions on that online, but that's what the manufacturer specifies. So I went just until I was able to get a little bit of oil on the end of my measured stick. I'm going to pop the spring in, and both the climber manual and the factory service manual specify that the titer coil should be facing down. I know there's a lot of mixed opinions on the internet. Some manufacturers specify different, but that's the way these are. Now all it's left to do is slide the new dust cap on. Always easier said than done. Beautiful. One rebuilt fork. All it just needs is another clean up on the polish, get all that oil off, and we'll torque the top cap once it's on the bike, which is what I'm going to do right now. While the forks were off, I took the headlight ears off and straightened out the turn signal mounts. I cleaned up the mounting rubbers in the process, but getting them back in was a bit of a bear. I'm going to use a little bit of that red grease to get past the lip of it again if I can. There we go. Go right there. There we go. Alright. Just snug for now while I get my torque wrench out. Man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to slip in there without a crow's foot or not. Maybe we'll just give it another little snugging now that it's clamped. Awesome. Left side. Just like the other side, I went ahead and put a little bit of that red rubber grease on the rubbers for the headlight ears just to help ease insertion. There we go. Well, there you have it. After way too long of fussing and fighting, rebuilt forks with new dust boots are polished up and back on the bike. Looking pretty good. Look even better once it's been cleaned up from all the oil and fingerprints. Well, that's going to do it for this one. I need to get inside and order some tires because honestly that's all that's holding me up here. Other than that, thanks for joining me. Hit that like button, please. It'll help me out with the Facebook algorithm. Subscribe and share with your friends if you feel so inclined, and I'll catch you next time.